Good morning, everybody. I'm between you and the coffee break, so I hope that my presentation is a little bit interesting for you. And thanks a lot to SteelOrbis to invite me to this conference. At first, I want to give you a macroeconomic overview. Then I have a closer look to the automotive industry and the problem of tariffs, not only of tariffs in Europe or in Asia. And then I have a closer look to the construction industry and the renewables sector. Then I want to review some other industries, and at the end I have some final remarks. Global population will rise to 9.66 billion people in 2015. In the current year, we have a population of 8.2 billion people. Why do I start with this slide, a presentation concerning steel? Because we have, in addition, 1.5 billion people on this planet. They want to eat. Therefore, we had to build new greenhouses. We had to extend our agricultural equipment, and therefore we need a lot of steel. We had to water the plants, and therefore we need tubes and pipes. And these people want to have houses, so the construction sector will get positive impulses. And at the end, they also need power. And we had to build up new capacities for electricity and power generation. And the peak of the population is expected in the mid of the 2080s. So what's a very quick look on this slide, because the two speakers prior to me used a similar slide. You see here the outlook of the International Monetary Fund from July in the current year. And you see that for the next year, there is only a global growth of 3.1% expected. Eurozone is lower in growth. Germany will recover a little bit. I see one risk in the Eurozone, and that's France. France had a very quick change of the government. The last government held only for 7 months, and France has a problem to do something against his huge deficits. And neither the politicians on the right wing nor on the left wing want to do something significant against this. So perhaps France could see a much more lower economic development in the next years. Okay, but what's in the Asian and Pacific region? You see that Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are doing very well. They have huge growth rates in the next years, around 5%. Korea and Australia are lower because South Korea and Australia are, in my opinion, less developed countries. They are very, very big players. And Thailand has, at the moment, some political issues. That's the reason why the growth is a little bit lower than in former years. Pakistan, the growth is negatively impacted by its conflict with India. Africa and the Middle East show also a very strong growth with rates around 4% in Egypt, Nigeria with 3.5%. Saudi Arabia improves very quick, in my opinion, and also Turkey will show growth rates during the next years above 3%. Iran in the current year with a very low growth rate of around 0.5%. That's a result of the conflict with Israel and the bombing in the current year. This depresses the GDP and also the discussion concerning further sanctions against his nuclear program. In Latin America, Argentina is back on the global economy after 2 years of negative growth rates. In the current year, we expect a growth rate of 5.5%, and in the next year, also something like 4.4%. Brazil is in the current and the next year negatively impacted by US tariffs. And these US tariffs are very high in relation to some other countries. Why? It has political reasons. Mr. Trump is not amused that his buddy Bolsonaro had perhaps some trouble as a result of the attacks to the government in the last year. Canada has also high negative impacts coming from the US tariffs. And meanwhile, we see in Canada a boycott against American products. They don't buy longer strawberries or grapes from the United States. They do not travel to the United States. But in total, this is also a negative impact on the economic development. Same to Canada, which is also very, very negatively conflicted from the tariffs. What's with the exchange rate in the next months? You see here in the first row the exchange rates of last Friday. And in my opinion, the euro will improve a little bit during the next months, mainly against the United States. The British pound is stable, and the same like the Swiss franc. A problem may be the further development of the Turkish lira. I have the opinion that we will see the 50 lira per euro perhaps in the current year. If I do a new outlook, I think I will improve this at the end of the first quarter to 52 probably. The Japanese yen will develop a little bit better, and the renminbi will also develop around 8.45 renminbi per euro. Okay, let us have a look on the trade wars. You see here the German exports, for example. The US was, for Germany, the most important trading partner. We had total exports of 161 billion euros and imported only 91 billion euros. So the United States has a trade deficit against Germany of around 70 billion euros. Also, the same in the EU. They had a trade deficit of around 198 billion euros, and a third of this trade deficit came from Germany. But is this the whole story and the true story? I think Mr. Trump is not every time has not every time the right view. You see here the US deficit against the EU in trading goods, but in contrast, the United States has a surplus of 148 billion euros in the service sector. So the aggregated deficit is below 15 billion euros. So Mr. Trump had only one part of the view. If you have a closer look on Germany, and you see that the total trade deficit is 73.6 billion euros to the US. And if we see this and take into account the aggregated deficit, so the United States have a surplus against euro in whole of 24.1 billion euros. So you could argue Mr. Trump imposes high tariffs on Europe only because he wants to affect Germany. That's maybe an argument, but you had to take into account that this 24 billion surplus means not that he has a surplus against every other European countries. He has also deficits against some European countries. So let us have a look now on the other economic situation. Let us have a look on the global oil market. In the second half of the current year, the global oil market is balanced after the OPEC Plus raised the production, especially Saudi Arabia produced more. And also in the next year, we have a very well supplied market if there are no problematic situations. Why? What could happen? A lot of things could happen. At first, also, you had to take into account that every month you find in the monthly oil market report of OPEC a very small sentence: we are not really secure about the Russian oil production, oil output. That's very difficult to find this sentence, but it says something how big the risk could be if you take into account these numbers. We had at the end of, and also last Friday, prices fluctuating around $68 per barrel Brent. The American WTI is around $4 below this level. Is there a risk that we could see the higher prices? Yes, we have a higher risk to see higher prices. In the first presentation this morning, you saw the oil hotspots and the trading hotspots around the world. And you see also a button at the Strait of Hormuz. If the conflict between Israel and Iran, or the conflict around some other countries, lead to the situation that Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, you will see a sharp rise in oil prices of around $20 to $25 within some days. Because the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important streets in the world of sea trade and one of the most important for tankers with oil. We have, that's more a European problem, electricity prices are still high. We expect until the end of the year, until the first quarter of the next year, prices around 100 euros per megawatt hour. Okay, let us have now a look more in detail to the global automotive industry. Until the fourth quarter of last year, we expected a growth of the global light vehicles production. But beginning from the fourth quarter, the production numbers came down, and at the end, we saw only a slight decline to 89.5 million light vehicles. In the current year, no new recovery has started. We expect a further decline to 89.2 million light vehicles. In the next year, we come perhaps back to the numbers of 2024. And from 2027 on, we see here a light improvement. And the former production high will be reached not earlier than 2029. And what you also see, we have a strong increase in the Chinese production in the next years. The European and the North American production came only sidewards. We see a further decline here, and we see not more than 80 million light vehicles in Europe, significantly lower than the former numbers of 22 to 24 million. We see also in the United States a production level of only 16 million light vehicles in North America. But we see a strong increase in the other Asian countries. And you see also here that Japan and South Korea lose market shares. They will go behind India and the other Southeast Asian countries. What we see is a strong production number of electrical vehicles. This is a production number of pure battery electric vehicles in 2024, mainly sold in China with a market share of around 2/3. Then came the United States, and we see then Great Britain and Germany on the next two places. India is also not a big player in the market. Japan also very low in demand. What does it mean for the steel demand? Let me give you a quick example. If you produce a Jaguar with a classical power engine, the engine block weighs around 94 to 96 kilograms, including the surroundings. If you substitute this engine block by a battery, by a complete battery, including an aluminum battery house, this battery weighs around 202 to 206 kilograms. So you had more than 100 kilograms additionally weight in your car. Therefore, it is necessary to reduce weight on other parts of the cars. You had to use tailored blanks. You had to use more aluminum. You had to reduce weight at every part where you can. And this leads to a relative lower input of steel products in relation to aluminum or plastics or others. We have growth prospects for as well battery electric vehicles, plug-ins, and hybrid solutions. And at the end of the total production in 2030 will exceed around 67 million light vehicles. And the greatest market share is battery electric vehicles, followed by hybrids and plug-ins. So the demand from the automotive industry will change within the next years. Where will these battery electric vehicles produced? In Western Europe, the production goes up. We see a strong growth in China. The NAFTA region will be number 3 in the total market. And we see also the other Asian countries with a slow growth. Now, what happened during the last week with the global tariffs? A lot. At first, I start with the good news for European light vehicles. The tariff was reduced from 25% to 15% back to the 1st of August. That was a result of a meeting between Trump and the German colleague at the United Nations meeting in New York. But on the other hand, a high problem since the 27th of September, 2 days ago, the Chinese producers had to pay 100% tariff on every battery electric vehicle. Why? In my opinion, this is an indirect subsidy for the best buddy of Mr. Trump, Elon Musk. His company Tesla loses market share in Europe, they lose market share in North America, and I have the opinion that they also lost market share in Asia. Therefore, perhaps this could help to better sales numbers for Tesla. There is also a low tax on UK automotive production, but this automotive production is relatively low and not important in the exports. But in addition, we have a 50% tax on aluminum, on copper, and on steel. And during August, the Trump administration announced around 400 different product groups where you had to pay in addition to the normal tariffs, a tariff on the content of steel or aluminum. So if you have a part for automotive which weighs 100 kilogram, 50 kilogram from this perhaps steel, you had to pay, if the part comes from Europe, 15% for the half and another 50% for the rest. That means you have in total to pay 37.5% tariff. That's ridiculous. Negative impact last week, this group of a little bit more than 400 product groups were increased by another 160 to 170 products. So nearly 600 product groups have to pay these higher taxes. And this, in my opinion, is very, very difficult. Even the tariff authority in the United States does not know how to handle these problems. And for every European or Asian importer, this regulation means a lot of additional work to calculate this. Okay, now a little bit positiver look on construction and renewables. This is a new forecast concerning the global construction industry, and it's published in June, and it says that we had in 2024 a total production of 11.4 trillion US dollars for the global construction market. It should increase up to 2030 to 16.1 trillion. That means we have a relatively significant growth in the next years. The study says that mainly the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and emerging markets will grow even stronger. But the main part, and that Mr. Porter mentioned, is that it comes from the infrastructure sector, not from residential construction. A closer look to Europe, we see here that after some years of negative growth, from next year on, every region will show positive growth numbers. And we see, even in Germany, new needs for new houses, because if you stay in Frankfurt or in Munich, the house prices increased very strong, and the rentals are exploding in some regions. So we will see in the next years a recovery even of the construction sector. Main impulses in the construction industry will come in the next years from the power generation. Until 2050, we will see an increase of the global electricity demand to 72,000 terawatt hours. And you see also in absolute numbers a strong growth in the Asia-Pacific region. Even North America improves, and Europe, but a strong growth starting from a very low level will be seen in Africa, which has also one of the strongest increases in population numbers in the next years. If we have a look on the electricity demand in the OECD countries, we see it's stable with a slight reduction. The Americas improve a little bit, Europe goes a little bit down, and the emerging the OECD countries in Asia do also a very, very slow sideward step. In the rest of Asia, we have a stronger view. Even in China, the demand will see her peak in 2035. And then the demand will go a little bit down. Why? Because we will see a higher energy efficient production, especially in the industries. And we see no stronger growth numbers in population as we have seen in some decades prior. India, with a very strong growth, and the other emerging markets also are catching up very, very fast. In the Middle East, we see strong growth in the Middle East and in Africa. Latin America with a little bit more growth, and Russia and Eurasia will also see a relatively stable production resulting from a decline in Russia and a significant growth in the other regions. Will the energy mix change? We see some differences between OECD countries and non-OECD countries. The main difference is that in OECD countries, we see only a relative low use of coal and a significant higher use of nuclear energy, while on the other side, in the non-OECD countries, coal plays a bigger role and the nuclear sector is relatively smaller. The renewables in total are nearly similar as oil and gas. What we will see in the new renewable sector, you see here the production of wind energy for the next years. We see a stable growth during the next years in the onshore wind energy and stronger in the offshore wind energy. And the offshore wind energy will fivefold by 2030 in the next years. If we have a look on other regions, Asia and Pacific, you see a strong growth in the next 3 years in India and in China, but the other Asian countries are also catching up. In the offshore, you see also mainly a lot of new offshore wind farms. They will quadruple by 2030. And we see also a high potential in the next years, but it's not in these numbers because it's not started for Indonesia and for the Philippines and Japan. They are big countries with a lot of islands. They have potential for offshore wind, sure, but I think we will see this not during the next 5 to 10 years. In Africa and Middle East, we see also new onshore investments, strong growth in Africa in the next years, and a relatively stable development in the Middle East countries. Okay, let me have a quick look on some other industries. At first, the mechanical engineering industry. We see here, we saw in last year a total production of 3,300 billion in 2024. This will expand to around 4,100 billion in 2030. It's compared, for example, to 2015, an increase in 70%. China holds its leading position, and the EU is also growing significantly, but we see a stronger growth, for example, in Korea and some other countries. And in the next years, we will see a lot of production or demand for new mechanical equipment resulting from the artificial intelligence. The first speaker this morning shows you the demand from the construction sector for artificial intelligent houses, and you saw that there is a strong demand of 1.5 million tons, and this means that we see here also necessities for new generations of machines, and this will result in the next years to a high additional demand in the global electrical and mechanical engineering industry. But also the aircraft industry will show during the next years a lot of demand for steel and other materials. In this global aircraft industry, there is a high demand, especially for stainless steel. It's not only the classical ferrous steel, but we see here in the global aircraft industry a high demand, especially for stainless steel. And we expect also in the next years that single aisle and wide body aircrafts will grow very fast. Even the global demand for freighters will increase in the next years. But in addition, we have a high demand from the defense sector. We have a lot of demand coming in the next years from the defense sector. In Europe, in the United States, and some other regions in the world, much more money is invested into the defense sector, and this will result in higher demands for a lot of steel products. I was last week on a conference, and I saw the higher demand for special thick plates used for security reasons, and we expect during the last 3 years that this demand will double within only 3 years. The demand for the aerospace industry will also rise, but this is also more a demand resulting in stainless steel and some other products. Yeah, let me have some final remarks. At first, we have in Europe high differences in industrial electricity prices, and this will lead, in my opinion, during the next years to a shift from Western Europe countries more to Eastern Europe countries, or perhaps to some other parts, perhaps to Turkey or some other regions. And therefore, I think we will see shifts in industrial production, but also in the Northern Europe, Finland or Denmark have very, very low electricity prices. The wage costs are also an important factor. You see here the wage costs in the manufacturing industry in euros per hour. The Eastern European countries have much lower wages than the Western European countries. And also this could induce investments in Eastern Europe instead of Western Europe regions. And another problem is for a lot of industrialized countries is the aging society. Look, for example, the old age dependency ratio in Japan is by 55%. This is a ratio of people above 65 in relation to the working population between 20 and 64. And you see here that the OECD countries have on average something like 35%. So Germany, Italy, some other countries have much more problems in the next years to get qualified workforce. The other side of the problem is here. And, oh, sorry, I used this in German. Excuse me, gentlemen, I forgot to translate Egypt, sorry. I saw this in the first month. You see here that there are several countries with a lot of young people. But in some of these countries, there exists also the problem to get enough work for these people. I think this is a problem in quick growing populations like Saudi Arabia as well. And we know that some of the developing countries have high rates of unemployed young people. So this is also a problem and what we had to solve in the next years. And in my opinion, we will see a lot of shift of workforce during the next years from some countries to industrialized countries in Western Europe or in the United States. So what does this all mean for the global steel industry? In the medium term, we see a very low production that will improve during the last years. The problem of overcapacities, at the moment we have around 600 million tons of overcapacity in the global steel market. And there will come another 150 million on top during the next 3 or 4 years. This is a problem which should be solved, either via insolvencies or via active agreements. And it will become very, very difficult in the next years if this problem is not solved, because more and more will China export steel to other countries. That will be Europe, okay? They try it also with North America, but they will also go to the Middle East and Africa. So it's not so easy even for you who have perhaps lower production costs in Egypt or something else. If China subsidizes his exports of steel, you got also into trouble in some of your countries. Yeah, so I hope that I give you some information in this morning, and if you have some questions, feel free.
Thank you very much, Dr. Büchner. Any questions from the floor for Dr. Büchner? Yes.
I'm not the defender of Trump policies, okay? But I want to state something that obviously U.S. has a trade surplus with Europe, and what we in general, if you just differentiate between the services and the goods, and I understand there is I think trade surplus of goods is like 235 billion, and the services, if you subtract, there's a surplus of 80 billion. So there's a difference of 140 billion. But you have...
No, it's for Europe, it's only, and if you net this, if you have a trade surplus, trade and service surplus of just 48 billions. So it's not these huge numbers which Mr. Trump normally announces.
But I think what you have differentiated Germany versus the rest of Europe.
Yeah, we have in Germany a surplus of around 73 billion, and the total deficit of the United States against Europe is 48. So the US has around 21 billion surplus against Europe without Germany.
Well, those numbers are not the same as what the US is thinking anyway. Another thing I'm going to ask, it's okay, we have differences in our numbers. The second thing is you mentioned that on the automotive imports, that they will have to put like 15% in addition, and they will have to just look how much of it is metals, and then they're going to charge 50% on metals. I don't think that's the case. I think automotive cars will be produced, if it's produced in Europe, it will be 15% period. And I don't think it will have they will look at whatever is the metal content or aluminum content of it.
Yeah, but if you took a look on automotive parts, and I met an important client of me on last Friday, and they were asked to calculate the pure metal content, and in addition to the 15%, they were asked to calculate this.
I was under the impression that if you sell parts, yes, but if you sell the whole automotive, it's only 15%. But anyway, we'll have to look at it later.
questions from the floor? No, I guess. Okay. Oh, just one question here from Ram. Sorry?
One quick question. Yeah. Quick question for the first part, Doctor. You have illustrated that the population is growing, economical growth is growing, but we do not see steel is growing. Do you have an explanation? So let's say GDP growth rate is growing at more or less 3% per year. Population is growing maybe 1 or 2% per year. Steel consumption in the recent years, for 1 or 2 or 3 years, is declining 1% per year. Yeah. Do you have an explanation?
Yeah, because I think some products had been more raw material efficient. Look, for example, in the automotive industry, the parts become, the blades become thinner. You substitute, for example, parts from steel by aluminum or by plastics, and this is one of the reasons that you find. But the main reason is that we go to a more raw material efficient production worldwide. And
going forward, that will be the prospect. So going forward, the steel will not be growing.
No, I think we have now, within 25 years, 1.5 billion more people. That's, if you have a look around here, it's to 5 people of you, 1 came in addition by that. If you have not calculated this for the buffet for lunch, you will have problems. So people will be angry. And therefore, during the next years, you had to build a lot of new houses, you had to produce more energy, and you had to feed the people. And that will result in an additional demand for steel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Büchner.